Welcome to episode 35 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is my fellow analyst, Anshel Sag. So let's get started with my first topic. I spoke about this last week, the fact that I was going to write a Forbes article about 3 big predictions for cellular networking in 2021. And I believe I touched on private networking, but I did publish that article this week. Private networking is one. It's no secret if you look at the momentum that was carried forward from last year. Nokia, they've been, very, in the lead, as it were, with respect to private networking. They did announce a standalone 5G solution last year. They exited the year with about 220 customer wins. Those aren't networks, so they're multiple networks within individual customer deployments. And that was announced, that standalone support was announced, I believe, in late summer of last year. And then in the fall, I believe it was October, AT&T announced that they were partnering with Nokia to provide a private networking platform utilizing Nokia equipment. So, I expect this is going to continue to build. There were some other wins announced. I believe this Port of Seattle is going to roll with Nokia infrastructure for their private network. So I expect to see more and more momentum behind private networking this year. 2 other things. One is pretty obvious, Open RAN. I'll talk a little more about that in Verizon in the podcast, but I believe Open RAN will continue to find its footing. Standards are coalescing, and I expect to see a lot of pilots from the major carriers. I do expect, with respect to greenfield rollouts, when you look at what Dish is doing to roll out their new 5G network this year in the second half, there'll certainly be an Open RAN component to that. That's been stated. Rakuten in Japan as well. And also Reliance Jaya, we've spoken about them on prior podcasts. They're likely going to leverage Open RAN when they begin to deploy their 5G network. So they did a highly virtualized deployment with LTE, so no surprise there. And the third prediction I spoke to in that article, and if you'll go hit the More Insights and Strategy Forbes landing page, you'll find it quite easily, is I believe that this is the year that we're really going to start seeing 5G discrete services roll out, both for consumer and for enterprise. And consumer, it's pretty obvious, low latency mobile gaming. I think you'll see a lot of applications for smart stadium, as stadiums and, like the Super Bowl that's coming up, it's still going to be at limited capacity. And so, leveraging 5G and mixed reality to maybe bring fans closer into the physical arena, because quite a few of them won't be able to attend. So, nothing too earth-shattering. I didn't make any sort of crazy predictions of companies acquiring other companies, but I'm wondering, Anshel, as you think about 2021, are there other things that you think are really going to, we're going to see momentum behind with respect to 5G?
I think we're going to see certain carriers become much more aggressive on standalone and carrier aggregation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because they don't think that they're going to be able to accomplish a lot of these business use cases and new 5G use cases without, really improving 5G's coverage and bandwidth, as
Mm-hmm.
well as reducing the latency in a way that's meaningful against 4G LTE. So I think that's going to be something that's going to continue to accelerate this year, to the point where I think most operators are going to have some form of carrier aggregation enabled in some form of standalone. T-Mobile already has that, but I think it's going to be a global phenomenon.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where we're going to get to sort of kind of the true promise of 5G, when that core and that RAN are both, 5G. Then we'll start seeing, the tremendous throughput and, extreme low latency that will result. But let's shift to your first topic. And I believe, didn't Samsung have an Unpacked event this week, and there were some new devices they announced?
Yeah, actually, the Unpacked event was on Thursday, which is today when we recorded this.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
I did a live broadcast with our boss and colleague Pat. We talked about the whole launch and extensively for half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is I can condense it into a very quick 2-minute portion. Essentially, the entire S21 series, all 5G, starting price is $800. The S21 Plus is $1,000, and S21 Ultra is $1,200. And the S21 Ultra is the only device that has Wi-Fi 6E, so it has both the latest in 5G as well as Wi-Fi 6.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is the Snapdragon 888, which is in the Samsung S21 Ultra. Well, actually, it's in all of the S21s, but
Mm-hmm.
the Snapdragon processor has an X60 modem built in, which is the latest modem from Qualcomm. So it's capable of doing not only 5G carrier aggregation in low bands and mid bands, but also it can support the upcoming C-band bands as well when those come out for 5G. So
Mm-hmm.
the S21 is definitely the phone of today, but it's also very much the phone of the future. And it's the kind of device where you actually can probably buy it today and use it for the foreseeable future, because it's going to support pretty much everything that 5G networks are going to be lighting up within the next year or two.
Yeah, and I also read there were some other features like something referred to like Knox Vault that was, sort of a security feature, and I also thought I saw some sort of capability similar to tile and location tracking. Am I off base there? Or?
Yeah, so they did add some increased security. They have dedicated security chips and memory on board, which
Mm-hmm.
cannot be compromised. Essentially, they're adding a hardware layer of security in addition to the software.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did launch their own Samsung Galaxy tags. One is a Bluetooth tag, while the other one uses UWB, which is
Mm-hmm.
ultra wideband.
Right.
And that one will not be out until later in the year. Additionally, the S21 Ultra is going to be the first Samsung Galaxy S series phone with pen support. Traditionally, the pens have been for the Note series,
Right.
but this is the first Note phone that will support the pen. So it'll have the fastest processor, it'll have the fastest Wi-Fi. Only the S21 Ultra has Wi-Fi 6E. The other ones just have regular Wi-Fi 6.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if you want the best phone available, the S21 Ultra is it. It is a bit of a pricey device, but I think Samsung has more right-sized the pricing of their devices against what Apple is offering.
I don't have an Android product. I use an Apple product. I mean, from your perspective, I mean, is that pen, is it a great user experience?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's quite a good user experience, especially on the Note, because the pen hides away inside your phone until you need it.
Mm-hmm.
But I love using it to take screenshots. I love using it to sign documents. I also like using it just to like take notes sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty useful. I suck. My handwriting is awful. So it's not as good as if my handwriting was better. But realistically, it's still a very nice feature to have. And it's a very precise way of using a smartphone for applications where you might not be able to sign with your finger or something like that.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I have a demo unit. It's the latest Note, so not part of this announcement, but an AT&T demo, and I'm playing with it. And the overall construction is beautiful. I mean, it's an absolutely gorgeous phone. So.
And they kind of lean into that Note 20 design language with the new S21. So it'll be hard to tell the difference between the two of them from afar.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully you'll get some demo units. Maybe on a future podcast, you can kind of come back and talk about your user experience there. So why don't we shift to my second topic this week? And T-Mobile announced a 5-year, multi-billion-dollar deal with both Ericsson and Nokia to continue their 5G rollout. And I think you're going to double click into a massive MIMO support with respect to the Nokia deal. But I mean, what does this really mean for the Uncarrier? Number one, clearly, Neville Ray, the CTO, has been on record stating that, Open RAN is interesting, but not going to factor into their 5G deployment plans. This certainly, harkens, to that as well. And, also in addition to the massive MIMO support, with respect to the Nokia opportunity, they're gonna use this infrastructure to support voice over 5G, which is, I believe, VoNR. I like that an acronym, as well as VoNR, and network slicing as well. And truly, that's sort of T-Mobile. We've talked about T-Mobile, first to standalone, most impressive spectrum footprint for 5G deployment. And now, from my perspective, these deals really support fine tuning their deployment, and then getting a network slicing. I mean, that's really going to unlock a host of monetization opportunities for them, as well as for the other carriers once they get there, to monetize that multi-billion-dollar investment in the pipe. So I know you're going to talk about the massive MIMO aspects of that, but any thoughts? Any additional thoughts?
I mean, it seems like they're happy with the dual sourced approach.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they're using Ericsson for low band, and it seems like they're using Nokia for mid band.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a win for them because they're able to get more competitive pricing from them, but also they're getting probably the best of both worlds based on what those vendors have to offer. But yeah, I'll definitely talk more about it later in the podcast.
Awesome. Well, let's shift to your second topic. And you've been participating in CES this year. I took the bench on this one, but I know Patrick, our principal, and as well as you and a few other of our analysts like Mark Vina attended. And you want to kind of recap the CEO's 5G keynote.
Yeah, so I believe last year Verizon's CEO also keynoted the CES conference.
He did. I attended, I recall. And he talked about the kind of the 7 or 8 currencies of 5G, which is sort of Verizon's kind of approach to use case.
Yeah, and honestly, it felt a lot like last year's announcement.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of talk about sports and entertainment and museums and mobile edge computing, working with Microsoft and Amazon AWS. So they're talking about a lot of things, but at the same time, there was still talk about drones and delivery because they own Skyward. They bought that drone delivery management system company, and they still keep talking about ultra wideband 5G and what that means for sports and education. And they plan on having, I think they said 100 schools they're going to deploy millimeter wave 5G for. So it's an interesting conversation, but I didn't really feel like there was much meat to what they were saying.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider, like, I was watching it and he was talking about like our 5G network will support speeds of up to 300 kilometers an hour. And I was just like, okay.
So
what edge use case even needs to be close to that? Like, I think the fastest speed you probably need is maybe 100 for high speed rail.
Right.
So like, I struggle sometimes with how Verizon chooses to approach their marketing of 5G, especially when you consider that they're so far behind AT&T and T-Mobile. And I just didn't get a sense that they've really righted the ship's direction that much. And I think it might just be because they don't have a choice yet. For as long as they don't have that C-band spectrum, they're kind of stuck with this millimeter wave hotspot and DSS patchwork of 5G.
Yeah, I agree. From my perspective, what's really changed in the past year has been their mobile edge computing deployments. And it seems like every week, there's an update with respect to, they've lit up other areas of the country as well. And you're right. I mean, they're very focused on their ultra wideband service. It's millimeter wave. The challenge there, yes, it's very fast. It's very low latency. It supports these incredible speeds and capabilities, but that's very limited coverage. Yeah,
it's line of sight.
Exactly. Its line of sight requires densification, which is quite expensive. So, I think they're focused on, what they have in the barn right now. I think certainly that'll change. They will come out of the C-band auction with some upper mid-band spectrum. That'll also require some pretty hefty densification. We've talked about that, just the nature of
Yeah.
that 3.7 to 4 gigahertz. But yeah, I think for me, what they've accomplished over the last year is really building out, this mobile edge computing platform. As you mentioned, recent announcements with AWS, but also they're doing that with Microsoft Azure as well. So yeah, so we'll keep our eyes on this and see how things kind of roll in the future. So let's move to my third and final topic this week, and I'm going to talk about Verizon as well. And their CTO, his name is Kyle Malady, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, was speaking this week to the fact of what they plan to do with Open RAN, and it sort of seemed sort of double-edged from my perspective. On one hand, he was stating that yes, Verizon, we are 100% behind Open RAN. For me, that's sort of an oxymoron with what they're doing with millimeter wave, because with Open RAN, you're trading potentially radio access network performance for lower cost, right? And so maybe that's going to be part of their mid-band build out. I don't know, but at the same time, he caveated his enthusiasm by saying that, hey, we're going to kick the tires on it. We don't believe it's going to be a significant part of our overall current 5G deployment. So there were sort of some mixed messages there, and this may get back to what we were just talking about. Verizon's still trying to find its footing with respect to getting a deployment out there that is going to provide not only great performance but great coverage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So any further thoughts there? I mean, we don't want to whip a horse. We don't want to whip a dead horse, but
No. Here's the thing. Sorry, it's like really hot in San Diego. It's like 85 today.
That's okay.
What I actually think, and this may be telegraphing exactly what I was thinking, I believe that Verizon and AT&T, in order to deploy their mid-band spectrum, are going to actually have to go Open RAN to cut their costs, because I think they're going to have to densify their network so much.
And they're spending so much on the spectrum.
And they're spending so much on the spectrum that I don't see a path forward for their networks to fully deploy and realize that spectrum's potential, unless they go Open RAN and minimize their costs. And we know that Open RAN is already being proven on mid-bands already. So it's like the expectation and understanding of what Open RAN can do for mid-band is already there. And I don't see it being used for millimeter wave necessarily, but I see it could work 100% for mid-band as it's being used now. And I think that it's going to primarily probably be used for mid-band, to be honest with you. And I just don't see how Verizon and AT&T can spend $35 billion on spectrum and then think about, like you had earlier mentioned, it's going to be hard to deploy 3.7 to 4 gigahertz bandwidth, because it's a really high frequency for a mid-band. Like T-Mobile's 2.5 is already like not ideal, right? But they've Sprint has already kind of figured a lot of the physics of it, and it behaves like 1.9, but it's still not like a 700 and 800 in terms of coverage. So 3.7 to 4 is either going to require some very creative new technologies or significant densification, and it might be a little bit of both. But realistically, they're still going to have to densify the networks far beyond where they are today, because both AT&T and Verizon have benefited greatly from having their 850 and 700 megahertz bands that give them this great coverage. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But I 100% believe that Open RAN is going to be one of those doors that they can walk through.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And Qualcomm to the rescue here. So with their announcement, their small cell announcement, where they were taking those design wins with a few, handful of partners like Airspan Networks and blowing it out to about 20 to include folks like Samsung Networks and others. Should help drive an economy of scale, in the pico and small cell space that, I don't know if it's going to theoretically lower the cost, but I think it's going to do some of that. It's going to lower that bill of material to a point where at least it's a little more affordable to go densify these networks versus before that announcement from Qualcomm. So we'll keep our eyes on it. But let's hit your third and final topic. And again, you want to double click into like the T-Mobile announcements that I spoke to sort of very broadly with Ericsson and Nokia, and in particular, massive MIMO support.
Yeah, so I think the reason why I gravitated towards this was because I think it's a positive thing for both Nokia and T-Mobile. As you know, Nokia has definitely needed some wins in their traditional business. And I think this is going to be a big one for them because I think T-Mobile needs to roll out 2.5 gigahertz everywhere because it gives them the capacity to do stuff like fixed wireless. When they have so much spectrum, they can allocate 20 megahertz just for fixed wireless, and that'll allow them to have an entirely new business that they've never had before on top of their existing business. But I think it's a big deal because it extends the relationship with T-Mobile and Nokia for 5 years, which means that this is a long-term relationship and that T-Mobile sees themselves taking about probably 5 years to realize this full 2.5 gigahertz rollout. I think they said something around 3 to 5 years, but 5 years sounds about right. And it's important because this massive MIMO is kind of a technology that was first pioneered by Sprint because they were using it with their 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. And now Nokia is bringing it to T-Mobile. And I genuinely believe this is going to be the capacity and bandwidth solution to T-Mobile's 5G strategy. And I've already actually had a chance to experience it. They're already starting to roll out some of these cell sites. And I don't even think they're all necessarily going to be Nokia sites. They could be a mixture of Ericsson and Nokia. But from what I've seen, I'm getting 600-700 megabits per second in a very busy part of town in the middle of the day. And that's quite impressive when you consider there's no carrier aggregation yet. And one of the things that actually was touted in this announcement was combining T-Mobile's extended range low band 5G with the ultra capacity 2.5 gigahertz mid-band 5G, which together gives you the best possible characteristics of a 5G network in that you get both the coverage and you get the bandwidth. And when you combine the speeds together, you could be looking close to a gig per second in best case scenarios.
Yeah,
that's without millimeter wave.
Absent from this party is Samsung Networks, and it's no secret that Samsung Networks has been a key partner of Verizon's in their rollout. So I don't know if there's anything to necessarily read into that, but just thought I'd throw that one out there.
I think Samsung's approach has been very focused on enabling where they see an opportunity.
Right.
And I think that they've done a lot of research on millimeter wave and have done a very good job of delivering a solution that's competitive. And Verizon has clearly seen that. And I think Samsung will do pretty well in helping deploy these very dense deployments, right?
Sure.
To add capacity in dense areas. But I also think that people are going to wait to roll out millimeter wave once the pandemic is over, because there's not going to be anywhere you have a very high concentration of people
or demand. Yeah, no, that's an extremely good
unless
point.
you're in New Zealand.
Yeah, and to go back to T-Mobile, you and I spoke with Neville Ray several weeks ago, and clearly their focus is coverage, right? So building out that low and mid band spectrum and then, you know, sort of, I think the way he characterized it was millimeter wave is sort of the icing on the cake, right? And you make an excellent point, Anshel, that, you know, we're not going to get back to normal here until, you know, the soonest the second half of this year. And so there isn't going to be huge demand for, you know, people in stadiums and clusters and that sort of thing, just because people are going to be distancing still. So this is going to be probably a 2022 phenomenon. So it'll be interesting to see how it all rolls out. But hey, buddy, another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If any of you would like to reach out to us on social media and provide a specific insight on a 5G topic you would like for us to cover on a future podcast, you can reach us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.